recording? All right, we're recording. Tonight we are doing module 5, which is vulnerability analysis. Now this in and of itself, some people, this is all they do. So this can be a whole career in and of itself. So our learning objectives are summarize the concepts, explain the classifications and assessment types, the types of vulnerability tools, and different reports. Okay. So this is actually a nice little slide. Can you guys see everything okay? I'm on my tower today, so
yep,
everything's good. All right. So vulnerability, they're talking about the existence of a weakness in an asset that can be exploited by threat agents. So common reasons behind the existence of vulnerability here are the 4 big ones: hardware or software misconfiguration, insecure or poor design of the network and application, inherent technological weakness, like our IoT devices, careless approach of end users.
they missed another really big one.
Yes.
Scrim or penny pinching of the
Yes.
not our field, but the people who control the budgets don't see the need for to spend money to save money.
Yes, that is actually something I think all of us are probably have dealt with or will deal with. Okay, so here are some examples of vulnerabilities. Technological vulnerability, TCP/IP protocol vulnerabilities. There's those, if you look, are the unsecured versions, HTTP, FTP, and those. OS system vulnerabilities. An OS can be vulnerable because it's inherently insecure, or it's not patched with the latest update, or it's already past its end of life and should not be being used. Not on there, but that's a common one. Network device vulnerabilities. Various network devices such as routers, firewalls, and switches can be vulnerable due to lack of password protection. Believe it or not, I've seen this. Lack of authentication, insecure routing protocols, and firewall vulnerabilities. User account vulnerabilities originating from the insecure transmission of user account details, such as usernames and passwords over the network. I've actually seen some places that they've done plain text passwords. It's terrible. System account vulnerabilities originating from the setting of weak passwords for system accounts. And that usually is someone who just doesn't like to type in a long password. Internet service misconfiguration. Misconfiguring internet service can pose serious security risks. For example, enabling JavaScript and misconfiguring IIS, Apache FTP, and terminal services can create security vulnerabilities in the network. Default passwords and settings. We've talked about this a lot. Leaving network devices and products with the default passwords and settings, because anybody can Google them. Network device misconfigurations, misconfiguring the network device. Vulnerability research. The process of analyzing protocols, services, and configurations to discover vulnerabilities and design flaws that will expose an operating system and its applications to exploit, attack, or misuse. Vulnerabilities are classified based on severity level, from a low, medium, or high, and exploit range, local or remote. Now, by local or remote, what they mean is someone physically accessing it for local, or being locally within like a local LAN, or remote accessing it. Administrator needs vulnerability research to gather information concerning security trends, threats, attack services, attack vectors, and techniques. To discover weaknesses in the OS and applications and alert the network administrators before, there's your key one, before a network attack, to gather information to aid in the prevention of security issues and to know how to recover from a network attack. It's not if, it's when. It depends on how bad it is, but you need to know how to recover. Okay, here's some resources. Microsoft Security Response Center. And then there's Packet Storm, Dark Reading, Trend Micro, Security Magazine, and Pen Test Magazine. These are all really good places. And there are lots of other places, but if you need some good recommendations for security reading, There's some good ones, and a lot of these you can sign up for email newsletters, or you can set up feeds or things like that. So you can just like say you want to look for certain different types of trends in, say you want to look specifically at IoT devices. That you can set stuff up for that. It's pretty cool. Vulnerability. What is vulnerability assessment? Vulnerability assessment is an in-depth examination of the ability of a system or application, including current security procedures and controls, to withstand the exploitation. It recognizes, measures, and classifies security vulnerabilities in a computer system, network, and communication channels. A vulnerability assessment may be used to identify weaknesses that could be exploited, predict the effectiveness of additional security measures in protecting information resources from attacks. Information obtained from vulnerability scanner include network vulnerabilities, open ports and running services, application and service vulnerabilities, application and service configuration errors. Here is a vulnerability scoring system and database. So CBSS, this one's actually very common. This is the one that I'm on mailing lists for this one. This is from NIST, and it has, you'll see that CVE and the number, and then you can go look them up by the number. And if you look over here, here's another example, and you can just go out and you can look them up from cve.org. As you can see, it's just a continuation. NIST, National Vulnerability Database, Common Weakness Enumeration. So, you know, there's lots of them out there. There's also some governmental ones if you're doing specific like government control type stuff that you can go out and get on those as well. If you go to our CWI's cybersecurity website, there's actually a section where you can go out to those websites and see what they are. Okay, this is the vulnerability management life cycle. So you have pre-assessment, identify assets, and create a baseline. And that is very important. There's a lot of people that will they will not do that correctly. I almost said something else, but I'm sure you can guess what it was. Then there's vulnerability assessment phase, where you scan everything. And then the post-assessment phase, you do a risk assessment, remediation, verification, and continue monitoring. And then it cycles back again to pre-assessment phase. Okay, so here is what you should be doing in the pre-assessment phase. Identify and understand your business processes. Identify, and that, believe it or not, can be a huge problem, because if you think you understand, but you don't actually know all of the business processes, you can actually be more of a hindrance with your evaluations than giving them any good data. Identify applications, data, and services that support business processes and perform code reviews. Identify approved software, that's a big one. Make sure it's the approved software, drivers, and basic configurations of each system. Create inventory of all assets and prioritize rank critical assets. A lot of times you'll have an internal, external type thing, meaning this is like the server prioritized assets, meaning that you can rank them. I've seen a lot of them do like a 3-tiered rank when they do those. Did someone just... Yeah, that's a very good. A lot of people do not understand the business processes, and if you don't do things correctly, you can lose contracts if you're doing anything like that. Working within the education system, one of the problems that people didn't understand was the reason things were done a certain way was the amount of money comes from competing different sources, and what products you could use were varied for what money came from. It got very confusing very quickly. if you did not talk to your department head. So yeah, it can be very difficult. So for those prioritizing and ranking critical assets, it's a good idea to look at them from an inward out view. At least that's what I found. I would look at it from, okay, here's the baseline of what we need for technology, and then go out from there. Understand network architecture and map network infrastructure. Identify controls that are already in place. Understand policy implementation and standards compliance. Define the scope of the assessment. Remember how we've talked about scope creep? Make sure that you have a well-defined scope of assessment. Create information protection procedures to support effective planning, scheduling, coordination, and logistics. The vulnerability assessment phase, examine and evaluate the physical security. That one, a lot of people, since they hear cyber, they overlook the physical security aspect. I'd say 75% of the time. I had to remind people over and over and over again that that was actually part of our thing. Check for misconfigurations and human errors, run vulnerability scans, select type of scan based on the organization or compliance requirements, identify and prioritize vulnerabilities, identify false positives and false negatives, apply business and technology context to scanner results, perform OSINT information gathering to validate the vulnerabilities, and create a vulnerability scan report. Post-assessment phase, okay. So this goes in kind of a little 4 squares. So you have your risk assessment, perform risk categorization, assess the level of impact, determine the threat and risk levels. And then you move over to remediation, prioritize remediation based on the risk ranking, develop an action plan to implement the recommendation or remediation, perform root cause analysis, apply patches and fixes, capture lessons learned, conduct awareness training. Okay, then we move down to verification, rescan of systems to identify if applied fix has remediated the vulnerability, perform a dynamic analysis and review of the attack surface. Then monitoring, periodic vulnerability scan and assessments, timely remediation of identified vulnerabilities, intrusion detection and prevention logs, implementation of policies, procedures, and controls. And again, you just loop around as time goes on. Okay, let me scroll up here so you can see. Vulnerability classifications. Okay, so we have type, description, examples. Misconfigurations or weak configurations. Misconfiguration is the most common vulnerability and is mainly caused by human error. It allows the attacker to break into a network and gain unauthorized access to a system. So we have network misconfigurations like insecure protocols, open ports and services, errors, and weak encryption, or host misconfigurations with open permissions and unsecured root accounts. Application flaws. Application flaws are vulnerabilities in applications that are exploited by attackers. Flawed applications pose security threats such as data tampering and unauthorized access to configuration stores. Examples are buffer overflow, memory leak, resource exhaustion, integer overflows, etc. Poor patch management. Software vendors provide patches that prevent exploitation and reduce the probability of threats exploiting a specific vulnerability. Unpatched software can make an application, server, or device vulnerable to various attacks. Example, unpatched servers, firmware, OS, and applications. Design flaws. Logical flaws and functionality of the system are exploited by attackers to bypass detection mechanisms and acquire access to secure systems. So example is incorrect encryption and poor validation of data. And then there are what are called third-party risks. Third-party services can have access to privileged systems and applications through which financial information, customer and employee data, and processes in the enterprise's supply chain can be compromised. So vendor management, supply chain risks, basically stuff that's outsourced and cloud-based can cause more issues. Okay, vulnerability classifications. We just have the type and description, default install, default configuration. These are kind of massive, so I'm going to let you go through the description. And then if you have a question about one, just let me know. OS system flaws, default passwords, 0-day vulnerabilities. Remember, those are the ones that are unknown. They're exposed, but not yet patched. Legacy platforms read old, which are vulnerable, system sprawl, or undocumented assets. I have yet to find a system that does not have this problem. The amount of which they have depends on how bad it is, but if you have good documentation of your assets, you might have a few problems. If you have just an absolute trash asset document system, it can be really, really bad. Improper certificate and key management. Okay, types of vulnerability assessments. So we've talked about active and passive. So there's active and passive assessments. Basically, there's one that uses a network scanner, and there's one that you sniff out the traffic for the passive. External assessments, you go basically from a hacker's perspective. Internal assessments, you scan from internal infrastructure. A lot of those can be they can be good because you can get kind of a heads up on the people that are going to be a problem in your internal environment, but it's always good to have a mix of internal and external. Host-based assessment, so this is a configuration level check. Network-based assessment, this one's network security attacks. Application assessment, so this is like your web infrastructure, looking for misconfigurations, outdated content, and known vulnerabilities. Database assessments, this is like your SQL, MySQL, anything like that. Wireless network assessments, so that's basically all it is you go check the wireless network. Distributed assessment, so this assesses the different assets that are distributed within the organization. So client and server applications and things like that. Credentialed assessment, so this assesses the network by obtaining credentials of all machines in the network. Then there's what's called a non-credentialed, and that is you do that without having any credentials. There's a manual assessment, and with this you do like just manually assess all your vulnerabilities. And then there's automated, and you can use different assessment tools like Nessus. Nessus makes some pretty sweet tools. They were bought up by, I can't remember the name of the company right now, but Nessus is an excellent tool. So if you ever get the chance to use them, do it. It's really worth the money. And sometimes they'll even give you like a 30-day, hey, come try this out, and you can do a lot within that 30 days. Okay, so assessment tools. This is Quail's vulnerability management. And you can see here, a lot of them, you'll see this circle with the different cuts in it for their dashboards. This is a cloud-based service that offers immediate global visibility into IT system areas that might be vulnerable to the latest internet threats and how to protect them. Aids in the continuous identification of threats and monitoring of unexpected changes in a network before they become breaches. Okay, this is Nessus Professional on the left and GFI LandGuard. And as you can see, and this is only one of the screens for Nessus, there are a ton of different screens. But one of the things I like about their color coding is you can build all sorts of things. So it's an assessment for identifying vulnerabilities, configurations, and malware. And blue is basically low level, and red's a warning, and orange is a warning, and red is go take care of this now. This is bad. GFI LandGuard I have not used, but this one scan, detects, assesses, and rectifies security vulnerabilities in a network and also with connected devices. This is OpenVAS and Nikto. They are actually both good. I've used both of these. Nikto is on Kali as well as Parrot, it looks like. OpenVAS is a framework of several services and tools offering a comprehensive and powerful vulnerability scanning and management solution. And then Nikto is a web server assessment tool that examines web servers to discover potential problems and security vulnerabilities. So you can see where they have that there. The -H asks for basically it asks for what you can do to that. And then they're going after that website. And then this gives you, I think tuning is where they're just looking over the whole thing to give them different options. If I remember Nikto's commands. Yeah, that doesn't sound fun. Tanium, is that what you said it's called? I've never used that one.
Yeah, it's called Tanium, and it slows, as I said, it slows down the whole entire computers. And unfortunately, they have set to where it runs every time you reboot your machine, and they
Oh
want
my
you to
gosh.
reboot your machine daily. And sometimes it gets to the point where it's so slow it'll take hours to actually run. So half time you're stuck without getting to work for like a couple hours until it's done running.
Oh
On
my
top of
gosh.
that, they're repeatedly finding actual like what's it called 0-day exploits through various programs on the NMSI machines that Tanium doesn't detect. So
You're like, this is super helpful. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
pretty much that's like everyone's complaint.
Okay, so if you want any other vulnerability assessment tools, you have like a whole big thing here of different ones you can try. I've tried Nexpose, but a lot of these I haven't tried out. But you know, a lot of them will have different trial ones that you can do. Okay, vulnerability assessment reports. Getting good at writing these reports is a tool in and of itself. Vulnerability assessment reports disclose the risk detected after scanning a network. Hold on one second. Sorry, the vet's here and had a question about the kitty. Okay, vulnerability assessment report discloses the risk detected after scanning a network. The report alerts the organization of possible attacks and suggests countermeasures. Information available in the reports is used to fix security flaws. And you can see these are the sections that you want. Your executive summary is really, really important. If you are talking to anyone who is not technically based, you stick all of your stuff in there and you write it down in explanation so that you can write as many common terms as possible. It is really, really, really important to do that, because if you don't have executive buy-in, if you can't explain it to them, then they'll go, what's the point of spending money on this to fix it? Assessment overview, findings, risk assessment, and then your recommendations section. Now, a lot of times you will write more than one of these reports, depending on who they're aimed at. Usually I would write a director/executive one for people who do not understand, you know, like your purchasers, your bean counters, your directors that don't understand anything about technology. And those you write down to people who, and by that I mean, when you write up, you're writing to people who are educated in your field. You can use the big words, the big concepts, but when you're writing down, you're writing down to a lower level of experience, and you want to, you don't want to write down and making them feel stupid, because that will make them also less likely to support you. But you don't want to use terminology that they cannot understand, because if they get frustrated, they will get angry, and then they will not work with you. Okay, here are components of an vulnerability assessment report. So in your executive summary, you want the assessment scope and objectives, testing narrative, findings summary, remediation summary. A lot of times, that's all the people that don't understand the other parts will read. Assessment overview, so you have your assessment methodology, scan information, and target information. Findings, your scanned host, types of vulnerabilities identified, detailed information on identified vulnerabilities, notes describing additional details of scan results, your risk assessment, classification of vulnerabilities based on the risk level, potential vulnerabilities that can compromise the system or application, critical hosts with severe vulnerabilities, and then your recommendations section. Prioritization of remediation based on risk ranking. Action plan to implement the recommendations for each identified vulnerability. Root cause analysis, application of patches and fixes. What are your lessons learned? Awareness training, always throw something in there about awareness training. Implementation of periodic vulnerability assessment. If you do not put that in there, a lot of executive level people will think, oh, this is one and done. They don't understand that you can't do that. It needs to be periodically repeated. Implementation of policies, procedures, and controls. Okay, so this one wasn't too painful. So let me go look at our content for the rest of the week. If you're lucky, yeah, look at that. Now we only have 6, 7. So it looks like you guys get a not too painful night tonight. So I'm going to stop there. And what I would encourage you guys to do is use this extra time tonight to go and let's go use the time to do your CyberQ labs. That's why I said go do your labs. So this is the end of the lecture part. So let me stop the recording.